Dean Palama to come up to give us the opening pule.
Aloha e, aloha e, aloha e. E puli kako, let us pray. E Yehovah Hemalele, ke akua I ka hiko I ka nani, ka ihi a me ka hano hano, ke ho mai ka I ke hozana, ke mililene a ho aku nei mako ia oi. No leila, e aloha mai oi I kaupoe, kaua I a koa mai nei. E ho mai ka I mai a mako a me ka mako mauhana. A e launa pū mai ko hani Hemalele, me mako I kuliki ai, ka mako lawe ana, I kau hana me kau I make ai. Ke noi aku nei I ko aloha, a me ka loko mai kai, e hawi mai a mako I ka ike, a me ka naawao. A e ho'o mā lama I ko mako naao. O ka haku, e olu oi, e hui kala mai a mako, e hiki ai a mako a pau. O ke ia ko mako puli haa, I loko kainoa, o ko mako haku aloha o Yesu Christo. Amen. Lord, we are thankful for the breath of life you have given us today. Bless all of us, our ohana, who are gathered today, and to those who were not able to attend. Bless our staff, for they are the backbone of our organization, and to the many volunteers who support us with their time, energy, and spirit. We are ever so grateful. Bless all of our families. Bless our board members and officers, both past and present. And especially to our Executive Director, Tom Woods, for his vision in leading us to the 21st century with a Hawaiian presence. We humbly ask for your forgiveness, and if we have gone along the wayside and have forgotten those ways, we also ask to forgive each other. If we have hurt each other in our thoughts, words, and deeds, please forgive us for our shortcoming. E maoloa mai ke aloha, o e Yehovah ke akua, me ka loko mai ka I ko mako haku aloha o Yesu Christo, me ka launa aloha ana mai o ko uhani Hemalele, me mako pakahi a pau. Amen. Mahalo.
And now Mary Fiedler will lead us in singing the Blessed Be the Tie That Binds, of course.
One of the great old missionary hymns. We're only going to do one verse at the request of Martha. Blessed be the tie that binds our hearts in Christian love, the fellowship of kindred minds is like to that above.
Thank you, Mary. So instead of taking time today with reports, the executive directors and treasurers' reports will be available online and in the offices so that we may take the time to share in exciting new research. So the first order of business today is the approval of the 2016 meeting minutes. I'm sure all of you have read them. May I have a motion to approve? Alan? A second? Lindsay? Is there any discussion, any corrections? All in favor? Any opposed? The minutes are approved. Okay, Tom's now going to do recognitions.
Thank you, Martha. So, staff, would you please come over to over by the fence so people can see you? It's always important to recognize staff. It's the staff that keeps this place going, and as a supervisor, I've always thought that you really don't come into a job as a good supervisor. Your staff makes you a good supervisor because they're the ones who tell you what they need to be successful. And that's how you become a well-functioning staff, is when your staff communicates to you, lets you know what they need, and then you work together on it. So I'm very grateful to be working with this staff. So let me begin alphabetically with Guada Amore. Guada. There's Guada. She's our housekeeper. John Barker, our curator of archives. Gabriela Bonilla, our accounting manager. Diane Ching, Field Marshal Ching, our sales manager. Herman Kobile, our maintenance groundskeeper. Jaron Gable. Jaron, are you here? He's probably in the store. He's our cashier and sales associate. Bonnie Louise Judd. Bonnie, communication specialist. Marianne Lentz, our development and society relations director. Did Elizabeth make it yet? She was caught in traffic. Elizabeth Po'oloa, our collections curator. She said she'd be here in a bit, so when she arrives, we'll have her stand up. Mike Smola, our curator of public programs. Lisa Solomine, our executive assistant. And finally, Marcia Timboy, our assistant programs curator and volunteer coordinator. So these folks really make things happen here. I also want to talk about some of the outgoing board members and thank them. Tony Bisson has left the board in the last year. Andrew Yanni left the board in the last year, and Doug Sheehan left the board in the last year. So I'd like you to give applause to these board members who have left the board recently. And Charles Black, you're not here yet, are you? I know he's not going to say no, but if he's not here, he's not here. Well, okay. Well, when Charles comes, we'll talk about his board directorship of 28 years. Anyway, when Charles comes, he can take a bow, but I'll tell you right now, he was a board member, we think, for at least 28 years, maybe longer. That's what we can find. So he was 9 years this time and rotating off now. He was trustee for 9 years from 1963 to 1974. And then he was president from 1970 to 72. Then he came back on the board for 9 years from 1982 to 1991. Then he came back on the board from 2008 to 2017. So he's been here for a long time. And he was the chairman of the, I guess, sesquicentennial for the mission long ago. So Charles has been a very, very productive member of this organization for a long, long time. And Martha. Martha has served as president for the last 4 years at Mission Houses. And I just tell you, it was a delight to work with Martha for the past 4 years. She's been wonderful to work with. She, as you know from reading her articles in the Miley Wreath, Martha has a really wonderful take on what it is to be a missionary descendant. She understands that it's okay to be proud of being a descendant, but at the same time, she understands that that carries some baggage as well. And she's been able to acknowledge that and move forward with a support for a program that really tries to, well, what I say in my booklet, which you'll read later, acknowledge the different perspectives that people have on the past. Because everybody has different ideas about what happened in the past, and some of them are equally correct. It just depends on who you are and what your position is in society. Martha understands that, and that's partly why she's been such a successful leader of this organization, I think. And I can't thank her enough for the last 4 years. She's been wonderful to work with. Thank you, Martha. We have a little gift for her in recognition. So, Martha is now going to call up Peter.
Where is Peter?
He's sitting right
Oh. So, Peter, it's time to give your report of the Governance and Nominating Committee.
Try to make this work. I'm going to try it this way. Yay. First of all, before listing the nominees, I'd like to thank the nominating committee, which included Charles Black, Mary Fiedler, Laurel Bowers Hussein, and Paul Morgan. We have a number of existing trustees that are up for re-election. Those are Paul Dahlquist, Sherman He, John Laimana, McKibben Mist, and Sarah Richards. In addition, we have new board members that are nominated: Malia Ane, Juliet Cook, Richard Emery, David Hirano, Jim Hunnewell, Ken Makuakani, Lucas Morgan, and Wendy Rice Peterson. And on behalf of the nominating committee, I would move that the slate be approved. Do we get a second?
I'll second. It doesn't need a second.
Doesn't need. Do we just call for the?
Well, Martha calls for the vote. Okay. Martha, do you want to bring up the new ones that are here? Lucas and Wendy and Juliet. Yes. So would you, if you are part of this new group, would you please rise so that we can acknowledge you? Wendy Rice, Juliet Cook, and Lucas Morgan. Okay, all in favor of the nominations? Any opposed? The slate is approved. Now I'm going to ask Tom to come up and introduce our speakers.
Does anybody miss all the board report or all the officer reports? I hope not, because somebody does. Okay, I think this is really exciting though, because we get to hear some of the results of the things that we've been doing in the past years and some of the folks that we've been collaborating with. First, we'll hear from Puakea Nogelmeier. And you know, Puakea is the director of Awai'ulu Foundation, and it was our partnership with Awai'ulu Foundation that resulted in the digitization of the Ali'i letters. We digitized, John Barker digitized the letters. Puakea and his interns at Awai'ulu then translated them. First they transcribed them, then they translated them, and then they annotated them. And then John put those all up on our website. So those are all on our website now for everyone to see. So over 500 pages of letters written by the Ali'i, over 40 Ali'i or assistants to the Ali'i contributed to those letters. 230 pages. It's about 188 in Hawaiian and the rest are in English. A wonderful resource. If you haven't gone on our website yet to look at those, please do, because it opens a whole new world and a whole new perspective about the relationship between missionaries and the Ali'i. And then secondly, we're going to hear from Kapali Lyons, who's associate professor and chair of the Department of Religion at University of Hawaii. And Kapali is going to talk about this amazing project that he was involved in writing an article about the translation of the Bible into the Hawaiian language. And it's a perfect case study for how missionaries and Ali'i work together. And that's also what the Ali'i letters show. So you're going to hear from both of those today. Both of them also participated in our symposia, one at Punahou when we were partly done with the Ali'i letters, and then the second one at Kamehameha School's Kapalama campus. Both were well attended and very well received. So, without further ado, Puakea.
Aloha kakayaka, and does this, you can hear me okay? I have a loud voice anyway. And I don't have anything prepped. I don't have a lecture prepped. I wanted to talk to all of you about this project and sort of the ripples that made it happen and the ripples that come out of it. Because we've been working for maybe 15 years, and what I see happening is a renaissance of knowledge. The last 15 years, there was a marriage of technology and interest that suddenly made all these materials available that once upon a time were only accessed by people who were willing to fight the dust of the archives itself. But getting digital images, getting them up on the web, is this huge breakthrough. And so there's a much larger audience that's both able and interested. And so we've been working with that with newspapers, and I know you know much about that, I think. I had, in the course of that, sort of developed my own interest from lots of different proddings to look at the earliest of letters. I wanted to see, because in my mind, the idea of literacy, and I'm swept with the way that literacy worked in Hawaii. I've been continued to be impressed at how that affected the society and how the society affected literacy. And that's all the interplay. The mission force and the li'i force are a dynamic couplet. But so I wanted to look at how that literacy was embraced and what it did, because I knew, there's 40 years of interaction already. The modern sort of shallow understanding of things is the mission party arrives to teach the savages, and it's a sort of this interchange as though Hawaii had never changed. It was still this, savage pagan land. And well, actually, they'd had 40 years of interaction with the Western world. And granted, they're still wearing kapa and they're still doing many traditional things, but life had already changed a great deal. And it's a pretty sophisticated setting that they come into in its native way. So they've already got much of what they want, but literacy is a big piece of that. So giving the tool of literacy, to me, it's like giving us the internet. And many of you will remember when the internet wasn't available, and now look how we use it, how we've embraced it. Well, I thought looking at those early letters would be very much like collecting up all of our emails from the first 10 years. They gave us, the internet gave us a new technology, a new place to talk. And it didn't allow us, we didn't talk about the whole world, but there's a fraction of our lives that went into emails, and there'd be silliness and depth that would be there. It would simply be a little slice of the whole. So I thought the letters would be an opening on that, and I started to fumble around on that. And then Tom saw that we were doing that, and he said, I asked you to translate our letters a few years ago, won't you do it? And, why are you doing someone else? I was doing general letters. And so he and I sat down, and I said, I'm not averse to it, but I'm sort of at a stage in my own career that I can do a lot of things. It's kind of fun. I have all the toys. But if I don't train young people to do what I do, then when I stop doing what I'm doing, there won't be a body that can. So I told him I will only take on this project as a training. And he was very open to it. And this is actually, my interaction with Tom is my interaction with all of you. Because you facilitate, you as an association of family, you facilitate what he's been doing. And that's almost another whole topic. I'm terribly impressed. It's going to kill me to see him go back to Wisconsin, and I hope it does you too. But what's happened in the last 5 years as far as building relations outside of these grounds has been real impressive. And so this project is a little piece of that. So I've interacted with the Mission Houses archive for a very long time. Pardon? Oh, in my ear I'm very loud, all of this happens sort of inside my head anyway. But I've interacted with the Mission Houses Archive for a long, long time, but never really had a personal relation with the getting it out, the process of getting it out. I was just serving my own. And this created a new network. So Tom allowed me to do a training. I brought on 3 kids to actually learn how I handle letters. And we did a 1-year project. Many of you have probably already heard about this. 2 of the kids already had master's degrees in Hawaiian. But working with these letters was brand new territory. One of them is finishing his master's, and this was like getting a second master's on the side. And then I brought in my godson, a 17-year-old immersion language kid who's very, very fluent, but has no history background and had never even learned cursive writing. So he had a few hurdles to jump over to get into this. But those 4, they ended up, were so directly impacted by this. They're addicted, and they'll be working on this kind of material probably for the rest of their lives. But this is, like I say, this is a snippet, this piece. We chose the Ali'i letters. They represent a certain fraction of the interaction that was going on. Now we're expanding that. The possibilities that this project opened up show where else we should shed that light. Because we've been able to put most of the newspapers that are in hand, at least, up on the web. They're searchable. Let's call it rudimentary. We need to improve the quality of the text. But they provide a window into the past that is changing our modern perspectives. And it's changing how we understand Hawaii's history, mission history, Hawaii history in general. These letters and this collection is a particularly powerful force to illuminate that. Because the newspapers, it's a bit piecemeal. We're putting back together a fabric. But this body, this collection is actually, it's like a high beam in a way. So we've gotten one, we've got the pin light going, and now we're gonna just keep expanding it. Talking with Tom, talking with John about what's there, where can we go, what can we do. But I think it's very, very impactful. I think most of you have, I'm hopeful, looked at the website. Now look at it again, because I've already heard from some folks that, oh my goodness, but it's still in Hawaiian. Keep scrolling, folks, keep scrolling. The way that those 200 letters are laid out is there's an original, there's a typescript of the original, so you can see what we thought we saw. And I think, it's pretty accurate. Then there's a translation of that. Keep scrolling down, and below the translation will be the notes that we put in. These are not meant to be a scholarly annotation. These are intended to identify who are the characters mentioned, any kind of particular thing that isn't obvious from the translation that would help you understand it. That's what's in the notes. So they're not full academic, dusty notes. They're simply IDs that help make them make sense. There's maybe 200 pages in the Hawaiian. Thank goodness Tom has all those numbers in his head, because I've never dealt with all the numbers. If I really looked at 200 in Hawaiian and 180 or whatever in English, I might have given up. So it's better that I don't know. Let me do the one in front of me. Let me do the letter that's up tonight. And we did in the course of, we had a year's contract. My kids actually worked an additional 5 months to finish that set. And they are pleading with me to extend what we're doing. Because every session, it opens up new discussions, new insights. Everybody knows who Ka'ahumanu is, right? And everybody knows what she did. She's, Kamehameha dies, then she becomes Kuhina Nui, she does this, she fosters the mission project and whatever. The letters actually shine a light into that whole process. And if you haven't looked at, one of my favorite letters was one that I wasn't given, I already had it from your collection, by the way, and I threw it into the mix because it's so insightful. It's Ka'ahumanu writing to Kamehamalu. So it's really early on in the project. She's not convinced about Christianity yet, but she's liking what's happening. She loves the pono of it all, but not necessarily, she's not committed to baptism or anything yet. It's 1822. So she likes these guys, though. Immediately, the mission team that came were so different from the previous. She's had people in her world since she was 10 years old, foreigners. These are the nicest foreigners she ever met. They could be boring, but they were nice. Well, I mean, because their main project is proselytizing, and so they do that. But they also have a remarkable skill set. They do good things. They're out to do good things. And most of the ones that she's met in the course of her life, they do good things for themselves. They mostly either want a profit, or your daughter, or a piece of property, or they want something. And these guys don't want anything. They want you to listen. And that letter, which highlights, her positive, very positive connection, but it really focuses on, I have a new husband, cool thing, and you're not writing enough letters. We really want this letter thing. It really illuminates the mindset about this new technology. Because in the bottom she writes, we want literacy. It'll make us wise. And she crosses it out and says, we want the teaching of literacy. It'll make us wise. She's already literate. So we want the project. I think it's the smoking gun that launches the whole literacy effort on the chief's side. The mission is already driven. They want people to get reading and writing. The chiefs deciding that everyone should learn to read and write is really a collaborative effort that makes the huge product, that creates this repository. I'm not sure that everybody really gets a grasp on that the native language repository in Hawaii is unique in the world. And the fact that it's opening up in the last 10, 15 years. I've had, I don't know if you might know, Peter Arnade. He's our Dean for Arts and Humanities. He's an historian. He's been in Europe, a dean, an academic in Europe, in the East Coast of America, in Africa. He's been around. And he's so supportive. He's Kapali's dean, as a matter of fact, because he says, there are no new archives discovered. And the Hawaiian Archive is just this incredible resource that continues to unfold. And a big piece of it is right here. And so the changing view of history is being fueled by the mission houses, and that's by the Mission Houses collection. That's a new, huge impact of this, body on Hawaiian society today. Because Hawaiian history has been really distilled down into a very shallow package. Missionaries are all bad, by the way. Hawaiians are all nearly magical. And everything is gonna be fixed someday. Like it was broken from the arrival of Cook and will be fixed someday. It's this collection that makes that be three-dimensional, real, and really shows what a dynamic and positive force the original missionary parties were. Now, they're all human, and some of them I would have wanted to have coffee with, and maybe some not. But in the course of doing this, they've become individuals for me. And that's the beauty of it. I'm just a little droplet in the pool, but each one of us that builds the historical foundation we have becomes a ripple. It goes, what I learn and what I know ripples out to a broad audience. What you learn and you know moves through a different part of the pool. It's really important. The best thing that I can encourage today is that we all continue to learn history. I think that it flavors what we do today. And I love being able to say, when somebody says some shallow, vapid historical comment, to be able to launch into some little vignette to go, well, there's pieces that make this look different. So I'll pull up Ka'ahumanu's letter, or I might pull up, I think Kauikeaoli is just a hero. So I can pull up when he was a bad boy and when he pulled himself into rights. I like being able to do that. That's a tool that makes today better in a lot of ways. And you all have that access to that tool. So these 200 letters are a window into that. If you just play there, that's a good start. Now, I I'd love to have more of you learn some Hawaiian. You don't have to master it to be able to enjoy it. And if you learn 10 words this week, that's not really a lot of new words, is it? It makes next week richer, and it gives you a chance. You can just keep building like that and have fun with it. But if you play in these tools, look at the letters, look at the original and compare it, see the words you recognize, you'll be amazed. Hawaiian is not a magical language. It's really rather easy to learn. It's really hard to learn well. I'm still learning. But it's the language of this place, and it's the vessel that's carrying a lot of the toys we want to play with. So learn a little bit of it. It makes what you're doing richer. I'd love to get you over into the newspapers, because the letters, to me, is like what do you call that? An introductory drug? So they're a lovely little introduction into the broader world of what's out there. But they play off each other, and they illuminate each other. And so I want you to get involved in it. I want you to continue supporting it. We're going to lose Tom Woods. He has, with your support, generated a new kind of networking here that I really would like to see continue. And so I don't know who your new director will be. You've got a great staff that's trying to make it happen. I think the direction that you've taken is to be lauded. And so continue on. We've really only tapped the top of the iceberg. There's wonderful stuff awaiting, but we got to keep it going. So I got to keep teaching young people, because it'll keep us entertained for a couple of generations, I'm sure. Your grandkids will be able to play with this. So really, that's my word on the letters, is go play with them. Go enjoy them. Most of the ones that are in there are of interest. We're going to expand. Some of them are boring. My sister writes me letters. Some of them are good. Some are not. Okay, this is the whole mix, but you know, it's a lovely introduction to it. Play there, it'll raise questions, then go find answers to questions. Okay, I can't be more encouraging, but I also can't be talking much longer. So if anybody has particular questions about a letter you've pulled up, about, you know, how things are being interpreted or anything, I'm really accessible. I'm easy to find. So find me and track it. Get your questions answered. It leads to new questions. Okay, I'm going to bring Kapali up to talk about what he illuminated through these resources as one of the most remarkable events in translation recent history. So, Kapali, will you? You have to kiss.
Aloha kako. I'd like to tell a story of collaboration, one that's become very important to me, and one for which I'm particularly thankful for what Tom has brought to Mission House, the sense that this was never a one-sided operation. Imagine here, around the late 1820s, Reverend Hiram Bingham sitting in his study, sitting with his books, and on his table he's got a number of books open. He's got a Greek New Testament because he's been very well trained in Greek and Hebrew at Andover Seminary. He's got a copy of the Tahitian translation of the Bible, which he can get through. He's got a copy of a Latin New Testament, and he is trying to take the language of this Greek New Testament and put it in a language that will be meaningful to his Hawaiian congregation. Well, his Hawaiian at this point is functional. He can say what he needs to say. He can ask basic questions. He can communicate basic ideas. But it's not rough. It's not elegant. It's not appealing. And he wants a Bible that is going to be appealing to his Hawaiian congregation, who will hear it and feel the same things that he feels when he reads his Greek New Testament or he reads his King James New Testament or Bible. So he's sitting at his desk. He writes out his draft translation, nice, clean, clear handwriting, and he brings in his advisor, his language advisor. He had a number of them. One of them was Ioane Papa'i'i, or John Papa'i'i, and he brings in I'i and asks him to read it over. And I'i takes his pen, looks at the draft translation that Reverend Bingham has put together, and begins crossing out probably about 2 out of 3 words, and starts fixing them and changing them and says, "How's this?" And Reverend Bingham looks back at it and says, well, does that mean this? Does that say this? What's the effect of this? And they go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth until the verse is the way that they think it's right. Now, imagine this going on for 30,000 verses over a period of 12 years involving virtually all of the seminary-trained missionaries and a cadre of the elite educated chiefs and advisors of Hawaii, because both of them wanted to produce a Bible that would be meaningful. Now, we have forgotten sometimes today just how important the Bible was in the life both of New Englanders and in Hawaiians at this particular time. For many people, it was the book. You can find an echo of this today in Ni'ihau, where many people in Ni'ihau, it is really the only book that they use, and they read it constantly. It is a textbook. It is a language tutor. It is the book of stories. It is a source of inspirations and songs. And for people in Hawaii, this was still very much true at this time. It became clear that missionaries, at a very early point, that missionaries by themselves could not make an effective translation of the Bible. Now, I know most folks here are probably descendants of missionaries, and the story of the Bible has been told by missionary descendants, and missionary descendants, or kids like every other kids, they love their parents and they tell good things about their parents, or mostly tell good things about their parents. And the story about the Hawaiian Bible was that a handful of missionaries came to Hawaii, took their Hebrew and Greek texts out, put out this beautiful Hawaiian document, and it has been the Hawaiian Bible ever since. And that's we can't underplay the element, the part of the scholarship that missionary translators had. They were the elite educated people of their country. They were the best trained scholars in the world in biblical languages at the time, taking advantage of new scholarship that had come in all the English-speaking world, had come to the seminary that most of them went to. But they couldn't do it by themselves any more than John Papa'i'i could do it by himself. He had no access to Hebrew texts. He had no access to Greek dictionaries. To this day, there are no such things in Hawaiian. So he was an expert in Hawaiian, knew thousands of mele, thousands of hula, could recite hours on end if the requirement was necessary, had learned word lists and categories from the days of youth, knew genealogy, stories, was a master of all things related to Hawaiian language, and yet he couldn't do it either. A decision was made in Kailua in 1826 on Hawaii Island that it was time to really begin translating the Bible, and a team of experts, missionary experts, along with Hawaiian experts, high chiefs, Kaka Olelo, advisors to high chiefs, the governor of Hawaii Island, the governor of Maui Island, John Papa'i'i from here in Honolulu, David Amalo from Hawaii Island, Kelo Kamakau from Ka'avaloa on Hawaii Island. They began consistent work to produce the Gospel of Matthew, and they produced a part of the Gospel of Matthew after a number of weeks of meeting, and then split it into a number of teams, each missionary translator together with a Hawaiian language advisor, and passing these texts back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Over a period of 12 years, the Hawaiian Bible emerged. And the result is really a remarkable one. It is an improbable achievement, an embrace of two cultures that really was impossible on one side alone. Mrs. Pukui, Mary Kovena Pukui, has remarked, and several others, is that the Hawaiian Bible is beautifully done. It is the language of the chiefs as it was understood in the 1830s and 1840s, the way one chief would speak to another. The choices of new words were carefully calculated. No English words allowed. New words had to come from Hebrew or Greek or Latin, or better yet, from combinations of older Hawaiian words, so that many words that have entered the language and are used literally in every conversation today were the result of those conversations and the Bible that emerged from them. One other result I'd like to just mention briefly is that the Bible in Hawaiian was not just a good translation that sits up on our shelves, and those of us who learn Hawaiian really should look at it. It was my textbook when I lived in California, in the desert of California, and I was trying to learn Hawaiian. The Bible was the only Hawaiian book I had, and was, as I was a biblical scholar by training, kind of amazing about how they could take these difficult Hebrew and Greek sentences and map them into a language that was so different. But the Bible served another function. I have a picture on a lecture that I give here with slides. Imagine a luakini, the old human sacrifice temple dedicated to Ku. Imagine those walls. That's a luakini. Chiefs brought priests and the people and kahuna. Sacrifices took place there, and Ku Ka'ilimoku was placated in order to achieve the things that a particular chief might need. That's a luakini. On the lower side, just below that, imagine a church, much like Kawaiaha'o Church. Guess what that's called in Hawaiian? It can be called a halepule, but it can also be called a luakini. The mapping of the old religion, the old gods, the old ways, the old terminology was, after much resistance, mapped into the Christian religion, the Hawaiian conception of the Christian religion. Kahuna, who were experts in various areas, sometimes religion, became priests. Pastors became kahuna pule. Kaola, who were a type of prophetic character, became the biblical prophets. And word after word after word mapped from what people were familiar with to what was new and served as a bridge from one era to another, not canceling out ancient Hawaiian religion, but finding ways to map it in, to incorporate what was what could be incorporated. In some ways, a baptism of old religious vocabulary to serve new Christian purposes. Anyway, if you're interested in this research, our new journal, Pala Pala, has a longish article on this. But I would like, as I come here, I like to think of that story of Reverend Bingham, John E. sitting there working out, negotiating the culture, negotiating the language, coming up with something that was going to be invaluable, not just to them, to their congregation, but to the entire history of Hawaii. And I really would like to particularly thank Tom for emphasizing this aspect of collaboration, of how this has worked and how this was so important in the history, not of the mission, but in the whole history of Hawaii. Thank you.
Well, that's just a very brief introduction about why this whole story is so important, about this relationship that really happened between the Ali'i and the missionaries when they first came here, and how important that concept of collaboration is. It is what happened, and it is so important to understand that. And I mean, often people ask me, so why did they cooperate? Why did they get along early on? And the evidence of that is everywhere that they got along. In the letters, the way they worked together to translate the Bible, the account books that Levi Chamberlain kept that show from 1824 to 1833 at least, that's when the book ends, the Ali'i the Ali'i Nui, the highest Ali'i, are bringing in food every day, sometimes every other day, sometimes 2 people a day. Their Kawikia Ole brings in a hog. Ka'ahumanu brings in 6 fish. Ho'opili brings in fish. It goes on and on and on. For 10 years, the Hawaiian Ali'i are feeding the missionaries here. Why are they doing that? It's because there's some reciprocity going on. They're receiving something from the missionaries, and the missionaries are getting something in return from the Ali'i. So what that says to me is they needed each other. In those early years, they depended on one another. The Ali'i needed the missionaries to help them survive in what had become a very hostile Western world that they were thrust into. They needed an advisor to help them navigate through all those warships that were coming by and all those greedy traders that were coming by. How were they going to survive in this new world? And who could they trust? So the Ali'i began trusting and depending on the missionaries to help them navigate through those shoals, those dangerous shoals at that time. And you see that in all the evidence. And people simply haven't recognized that in the past. But it's there in all the evidence when you look at it. So, okay, what happened? Why did the missionaries and the Ali'i sort of fall apart and begin going their separate ways? That's a very complicated answer to that, I think, and I don't know that I have the full answer to that today. But I think one of the biggest answers to that is they didn't need each other as much anymore. When you got to the late 50s and 60s, The Hawaiians had become Christianized. They were literate. They had been recognized by Belgium and France and the United States and England as an independent sovereign nation. They were moving along as a constitutional monarchy. They didn't need the missionaries as much anymore. And the missionaries and their descendants didn't need the ali'i as much anymore at that point either. So they started sort of going their separate ways. And it was also because this is a new generation of Hawaiian leadership. The older leadership had died away. And so the relationship that was there when the missionaries first came was no longer there. This was now Kamehameha IV, who had went to the Chief's Children's School, Kamehameha V, who had went to the Chief's Children's School. They had some different priorities and didn't need them as much anymore. So they started going their separate ways. That's a longer story, a very long story that would be fun to really explore someday. But I think it's wonderful to keep that central story in mind, that they needed each other and so they collaborated together. Keep that thought in mind. If there's anything that I want you to remember from the 7 years that I have been here, is keep that story intact. Remember that they depended on one another, and that's why those early years were so successful. Probably that mission was more successful than any other mission in the history of the world. And that's because the Hawaiians and the missionaries here worked together. And that's the key thought. Thank you very much.
I don't know how. Need that mic, okay. So I'm now going to talk to you in a far less scholarly manner about my own experience and my relationship to this place. And my talk is called Confessions of a Reluctant Descendant. As far back as I remember, my family came to this site for the annual meeting. I actually won the youngest baby contest in 1953 at 1 month old. I remember the meeting as a time to get together with my town friends, my other friends being the kids from Kahuku Elementary School. My town friends and I, dressed in our party clothes, would run around and play on these grounds as the grown-ups met and talked endlessly. I didn't understand what this was all about, other than that we were part of a group of families who referred to each other as cousins, and whose ancestors came to Hawaii a long, long time ago from the mainland. The story told to us was that they were very brave and they came to help the Hawaiians. As a kid, I felt proud to be a part of this special group. By the time my father left the plantation when I was in middle school and we moved to town, I was acutely aware of the differences between my school friends and my town friends. Not only were there racial differences, but cultural and economic differences as well. How was it that there were only haole families attending the annual meetings at the mission houses? Even at that age, a little discomfort set in for me. The civil rights movement was in full swing on the mainland, and I was horrified by the pictures of violence in Life magazine. I wondered how the racial differences portrayed in the magazine related to the way it was in Hawaii. Being a rather sensitive and dramatic child, I was fearful that violence could happen here. My parents assured me that Hawaii was different, and it was. Then in high school in the late 60s and early 70s, as the Hawaiian Renaissance was beginning to bloom, my discomfort turned to shame for the missionary heritage and privilege that my family enjoyed. I heard the message of those times loud and clear, and I took it to my young heart. What I heard was that it was the missionaries who were to blame for all of the ills that the Hawaiians had suffered. They didn't help the Hawaiians, they hurt them. The missionaries came to Hawaii to do good and did well. The missionaries banned the hula and the Hawaiian language. The missionaries were colonists who stole all the land and water from the Hawaiians and made fortunes. The missionaries were the cause of social problems like alcoholism and drug addiction because of the denigration and loss of the Hawaiian culture. When I was 27, I left Hawaii and I didn't return to live here for 23 years. I became a transplant in Cambridge, Massachusetts, a town full of other transplants from all over the world. My heritage was never an issue for me there. Nobody cared. I always referred to Hawaii as home, though, and it tugged at my heart. During this time, I learned enough to know that the history being told in the 70s was something of a conflation of time periods and a simplification of truth. My shame turned to indifference because there was no room for any other narrative. After returning home to live in Hawaii, I realized that much of the population was still telling that same story about the evil missionaries. In 2009, I was asked to be on the board of the mission houses, and I realized that this was a chance to re-engage with this issue for myself and experience the organization from the inside. It turned out that the mission houses was going through something of an identity crisis of its own. It was clear that as the previous generation of dedicated supporters, mainly descendants, left this earth, the next generation was less interested in providing the support needed to sustain the site. A bigger base of support was needed, but how did we become relevant in the broader community and worthy of support? Some of us were aware that the negative stereotype was stuck to us and would make many shy away. There was no clear unanimity as to how to define the organization's path forward. A strategic planning process was in progress, and a search for a new executive director was about to be launched. In 2010, before the strategic plan was completed, the board hired Tom Woods. This turned out to be a transformative move for the Mission Houses organization. With professionalism and sensitivity, Tom understood the situation and quietly set the organization on a new and clear course. Through his leadership, to broaden our base of support, our bylaws were amended to include non-descendants on the board. We changed our name and logo to highlight our most valuable asset, our archives. Our strategic plan was completed and has now been in place for 6 years with only minor changes. We established the 5 themes. The programs Tom and his staff produced or supported have brought a variety of people to this site, some of whom never felt welcomed here before. He has made valuable connections to the community with people who respect and trust him. His scholarship and historical rigor have shed light on interpretations of this history never before examined. I personally have learned a tremendous amount from Tom, and I've evolved into a devoted fan of this place. I no longer struggle with my relationship to my missionary ancestors. I've accepted it for what it is, and it's a fascinating story. A story that is similar to many told all over the world, though this story is unique and worthy of understanding for the good done and for the harm. It is still relevant, and we have much to learn about our time now by delving into the details of the past. I'm so grateful for having been involved here in the past 8 years. I believe Tom's biggest contribution to us is in helping to provide the beginning of a change in the public perception of what the mission houses represents. Granted, it is just a small crack in an entrenched view of the missionaries' role in Hawaii's history. But if we keep on this path by mining the archives and supporting scholarly research, that crack will continue to open up new perspectives on what happened here 200 years ago. We know that there were many, many Hawaiians, including the Ali'i here, all the time during the missionary period. We know that the missionaries could not have done anything, including survive, without their support. These facts and the ones emerging from projects like Puakea's research and Kapali's tip the perception just a tad toward a different story, which is still unfolding. It is a precarious shift, and one that has to be nurtured with the greatest humility and honesty. Thank you, Tom, for all you have done for us in the past 7 years. It would take hours to list all that you have accomplished here. Thank you for your patience and perseverance. We are honored to have had you. We have something for him from the board so he will never go away. Know all men by these present that on this, the 22nd day of April in the year 2017, Thomas A. Woods, PhD, was made Director Emeritus of the Hawaiian Mission Houses Historic Site and Archives. And now is it roll call? Oh, Greenland's Icy Mountains.
Turn around.
You do it, you do it.
All right. We are about to sing from Greenland's Icy Mountains and ask everybody to gather their keiki for the roll call. Beth Po'oloa, our curator of object collections, was stuck in traffic, but she's here and she's coming up on your left. If you will all take a look left. Beth was brand new last year, had been hired, I think, the day before the meeting. And today at 1 and at 2, you can sign up to take a behind-the-scenes tour with Beth. There's a sign-up at the registration table, and there's another sign-up out at the front table. So if you want to go behind the scenes with Beth, that's who you're looking for, and she'll meet you on the front lanai at 1 or at 2.
Again, at Martha's request, one verse from Greenland's Icy Mountains, another great missionary hymn. From Greenland's icy mountains, from India's coral strand, they carve sunny fountains, roll down their golden sand. From many an ancient river, from many a palmy plain, they call us to deliver their land from error's chain.
Now we'll bring Chris Abbott up to do the roll call.
Good morning, everyone. I hope you can hear me in the back. This is the interactive portion of the morning, so thank you very much for being here. It's a tradition, now in its 165th year, to have a roll call of those who are here and present with us, who are members, either descendants or otherwise, of this organization. And I'm looking forward to taking over for at least a little while a tradition that was continued by John Morgan, who unfortunately could not be here today. It is a tradition that the bell is rung to signify and announce, to signify the start of the roll call. So if I can ask Ford Lyons and Jack Lyons, the sons of Roger Lyons and a descendant of the Smith family, to please come up here for the ringing of the bell. And to assist with the counting, I've asked 2 counters to please assist us. Alan King is on my right, and John Sullivan is on my left. And finally, before we get started, don't forget that at the end we will be recognizing the youngest member here, the oldest member here, and the member who has traveled the farthest. So let's begin. From the Pioneer Company, which arrived in 1820 on the Thaddeus, the Reverend Hiram Bingham and Mrs. Sybil Mosley Bingham. Will those descendants, any here, please rise? Two. Mrs. Daniel Chamberlain, or pardon me, Mr. Daniel Chamberlain and Mrs. Chamberlain. 2, that was 2. Well, 0. Reverend Asa and Lucy Thurston. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4. And Mrs. Samuel, Mr. and Mrs. Samuel Whitney. Also accompanying them were the Hawaiian youths who came as part of the mission, Thomas Hopu, William Kanui, and John Honoli'i. Are there any other descendants who are not named from the first company present here today? Before we get to the second company, between 1818 and 1826, members of the London Missionary Society and Tahitian teachers and Christians arrived in Hawaii. We welcome and please rise any descendants of Tote Taua Ri'i or Tehuia Ri'i and his wife, Tau'a and his wife Tau'a Vahine. Oh. 5. Welcome. And Auna. Also in that group were the Tahitian teacher Toteta or Toketa, who arrived in 1818, the Reverend William Ellis, Ta'amotu, a female teacher who was also known as Ka'aumoku, and Daniel Kahikona. In the second company, which arrived in 1823 on the Thames, before we represent the companies, the following Hawaiian youths joined them as part of the mission. Any family members, descendants rather, of William Kamao'ula, Richard Kalai'oulu, or Kupeli'i here with us today. Representing the second company are descendants of the Reverend Artemis Bishop and Mrs. Mrs. Elizabeth Edwards Bishop. Where? 2. Oh, Lucy. Got 2. Oh, and you. 3. And Mrs. Levi and Mrs. Maria Patton Chamberlain. Mariah. Pardon me. Are there any other descendants of the second company present? The third company, which arrived in 1828 on the Parthian, included the Hawaiian youths who came as part of the mission. If there are any descendants of Henry Tahiti, Kiela'a or George Taylor, Palo'o or Samuel J. Mills, or Kala'a'uluna, John E. Phelps, in the audience today. If not, we'll move on to descendants of the Reverend Lauren and Mrs. Mary Ann Andrews. Nope. 3, 4. The Reverend Ephraim and Mrs. Mary Clark, which is all the Miss. 3. The Reverend Jonathan and Mrs. Green.
Where is he?
Dave, where's Dave Smith or Dave? There. We got 1. 1.5. Reverend Peter Gulick and Mrs. Gulick. I don't see Dudley. And Dr. Garrett P. and Mrs. Laura Judd. way back. 20? 20. 20. Are there any other descendants from the third company present? If not, we'll move on to the fourth company, which arrived in 1831 on the New England. The Reverend Dwight and Mrs. Charlotte Baldwin. Sixteen. Any other descendants from the fourth company present? From the fifth company, which arrived in 1832 on the Averick, the Reverend William P. and Marianne Alexander. Thirteen. The Reverend Richard Armstrong and Mrs. Armstrong. The Reverend Cochran Forbes and Mrs. Forbes. The Reverend Harvey and Mrs. Hitchcock. Two sisters. No. We got two. The Reverend David and Mrs. Sarah Lyman. And Mr. Edmund Rogers. Okay. Any other descendants from the fifth company present? The sixth company, which arrived in 1833 on the Mentor, before we mention the missionary, also was accompanied by a young Hawaiian, John To'ohana, as part of the mission. The sixth company included the Reverend Lowell and Mrs. Abigail Smith. Should be me. John. Me. Two. Any descendants present representing these other families? The Reverend John Deal and Mrs. Catherine Deal, Lemuel Fuller, or the Reverend Benjamin Parker and Mrs. Parker? If not, we'll move on to the seventh company, which arrived in 1835 on the Hellespont. Mr. Henry Demon and Mrs. Anne Maria Demon. Mr. Edwin Hall and Mrs. Sarah Hall. We got one. Has anyone here descended from Miss Lydia Brown or the Reverend Titus Cone or Mrs. Cone, who were also in that company? Then we'll move on to the eighth company. Celebrating 180 years since their arrival in 1837 on the Mary Fraser, we have a number of different families, many of whom are here today. The descendants of Edward and Caroline Hubbard Bailey, please stand. One. The Reverend Isaac and Emily Curtis Bliss. Samuel Northrup and Angeline Tenney Castle. Amos Starr and Juliet Montague Cook. Did I? You got these guys?
You got those two? Yep.
11. Edwin and Martha Locke. And Abner and Lucy Wilcox. Pardon? Oh, well, pardon me. I'm sorry. We got some Locks back there. Sorry, from the Locks, was that 3? 3. We got 3 from the Locks. Pardon me. And then the Wilcoxes, Abner and Lucy Wilcox. Please stand again if there's anybody here. We got 1. 1. Thank you. Are there any other descendants of the 8th Company present who were not mentioned? The 9th Company, which arrived in 1841 on the Gloucester, included the Reverend Elias Bond and Mrs. Ellen Bond. Three, the Reverend Daniel Dole and Mrs. Dole. The Reverend John and Mary Paris. And Mr. William and Mrs. Mary Sophia Rice. Six. Thank you. Oh, seven. Seven. Okay. On the 10th Company, which arrived in 1842 on the Sarah Abigail, today we celebrate the 175th anniversary of their arrival after a voyage of 143 days. Dr. and Mrs. Smith headed for Koloa, Kauai, where he was known to be called to help in Honolulu 40 miles in one direction, or in Waimea 12 miles in the opposite direction. Reverend and Mrs. Howell also spent most of their lives on Kauai. He built a great stone church at Waimea and later a small wooden church nearby. Do any descendants come from the mainland to represent the family of the Reverend George Rowell and Mrs. Rowell? Any descendants of Dr. James and Mrs. Millicent Smith? Also, 6, by the way. Also arriving in 1842, 175 years ago, were the Reverend Samuel and Mrs. Julia Damon, who arrived on the Victoria. Damon spent 42 years as a pastor of Bethel Union Church, Seaman's Chapel, in addition to publishing The Friend. All descendants of the Reverend Samuel and Mrs. Julia Damon, please rise. How many? 3. The 11th Company arrived in 1844 on the Globe. We believe all of their descendants live on the mainland, but if any are present, please rise. The 12th Company arrived in 1848 on the bark Samoset with 2 families, the Reverend Samuel Dwight and the Reverend Henry Kinney and Mrs. Kinney. We'll now recognize those who came as individual arrivals to Hawaii. We've already named the Reverend Samuel and Mrs. Julia Damon, who arrived in 1842 on the Victoria. But today, do we have any descendants of the Reverend and Mrs. William Spooner? Dr. Charles and Mrs. Wetmore? The Reverend Dr. Luther Halsey and Louisa Gulick. Next, we have the adopted families. Please rise if you're descended from these. Dillinghams and the Abbotts. You got 2. 2. The Eisenbergs. Got 1. And Richardson. 4. Are there any other adopted families, descendants of adopted families who are here who we have not recognized? We'll like to ask all members of the Board of Trustees to please stand. And finally, all consorts, spouses, and otherwise, the people that are here for the fun. I believe 8. I think it was 8. I'd now like to ask, we're now going to move on to celebrating and announcing the youngest descendant here today. I'd like to ask all children under 12 months of age to please come on up to the stage. Stand if you can. Hey, Lindsay. What's it? It's Emily.
Emily Winter Mist.
Our youngest descendant here is Emily Winter Mist, who is most important. She's a Clark, a Baldwin, and most importantly, she is the daughter of 2 current trustees, McKibben Mist and Lindsay Mist. We'd now like to recognize the member that traveled the farthest from Hawaii to be here. Anybody from Europe? How about the east coast of the United States? Where are you coming from? From New York City. I don't think we have anybody here who's traveled further to be here. So, congratulations. Marion, what's her name? Malia Majors has traveled here all... Okay. Malia Majors has traveled here all the way from New York, the granddaughter of the Gosses. And finally, we want to recognize the member here who is youngest at heart and who is probably coming to the most number of annual meetings. If possible, can I ask all individuals here who are attending today over the age of 85 to either rise or be recognized? Everyone over 85. If you don't mind me asking, how old are you? Well, congratulations, Mrs. Pratt. Joan Pratt is the oldest, Miss Pratt is the oldest member here today. Who's in the back? How old? 86. A close runner-up is in the purple in the back row at 86. Do you have another lei? A locked descendant. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes your roll call. So thank you very much for participating, and thank you for your support of Mission Houses. Martha?
Thank you, Chris. Good job. That's a hard job. Good job. So I'm going to turn the mic over to Marianne, who's going to do announcements and final dismissal. What are we going to do about the final song?
It comes after this.
Yeah, we don't have no one to do it.
That's weird. Can you do a what yellow? The afternoon will be, we'll have what's called station interpretation in the house. Main floor and the cellar will be open with docents to help you see what you've seen before and what's new and how things are. And the printing press will be running. The reason, I guess we didn't have a Gulick in the group because a Gulick's going to run the printing press this afternoon. And there are individual printing presses, candle making, and a new activity called Young Archivist, where you can see one of Ka'ahumanu's letters and copy it for yourself. You who are here are the ones who read the Miley Wreath. You are our core, and as a result, you know that we're planning a bicentennial. You know that we need a new roof. You may not know that within the last month, we have gotten 2 of the 3 approvals necessary for building the Holly, and the Holly is planned for right back here. The Holly will be built right back here. If you are local and want to be part of building that Holly, please let us know so that we let you know when we're doing that. It still needs some funding as well, of course. I have to say that, don't I? I have to ask you to give us money. That's my job. And just continuing to support us in all the many ways that you do means a great deal to all of us. I believe it is my turn to hand the mic back to Kahu Fran, and then we will all join in singing Hawaii Aloha. Oh, and after Hawaii Aloha, everybody present, whether you're a descendant, a consort, a guest, come pile up here, and our magnificent photographer, Phil, will take our photo for the annual photo. Thank you.
Mahalo. I just wanted to reiterate one of the things that Marianne had shared about our hale. Yeah? Where we were at HCDA, I was asked to do a testimony, public testimony about our hale. And I started reading and reading, and that manao did not come right away. Until the night before, when I read a one-liner that said, the ali'i had built a hale for the missionaries. And I looked at this and I said, and I'm having chicken skin as I stand up here, that it was a makana from the ali'i to the missionaries. So when I looked at our hale that's being built, it's our makana back to our community. So mahalo ke akua, mahalo na kupune pulikako. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for all the mana'olana that have come forth and our guest speakers, but more so all of our families who found their way back home here. We thank you so much for this beautiful day, for surely it was pouring where many of us were coming from. And we ask, Father, that we continue this journey of reciprocity, this journey of curiosity and learning of one another and our history here in Hawaii. And through all these things, if we have fallen short, again, we ask for your most looking at us and asking that you forgive us for our shortcomings. And in all these things we ask through our Lord Jesus Christ. Amen.
And the hymn we sing all the time, Lorenzo Lyons, Hawaii Aloha. E Hawaii e kuho me hanane, kuho me kulai vine, oli no au hina pono lani o. E Hawaii aloha e haoli e na o pio Hawaii ne oli oli e mai na ahe makana pa mai ne mau ke aloha no Hawaii e hao